Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am live again. Today we're going to be talking about the Christian founding of America. No, not the satanic founding of America, not the Freemason founding of America, the Christian founding of America. I hope you agree with me that the evidence I've presented proves that it is overwhelmingly clear that America was founded by Christian fathers on a Christian foundation. And I think I've managed to, all these nuances, all of these claims, I think I've managed to rebut them very well, very successfully. And today, again, I'm joined by Eric the Kafir, and thank you for joining me. One, your benefits are, well, the benefits for me are he's an American, so he speaks American, he knows American, and he's got an education. I'm just the guy who makes PowerPoint slides. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite. I spent 17 years as a history teacher, American history teacher in the public school system. So American history is something that I know quite a bit about, and anytime that I have the opportunity to talk about it, I'm going to talk about it, especially
Fantastic.
with people who want to learn from it.
Also, you actually had your PhD, that you actually are a doctor?
It's a doctorate in practical theology. It's not a PhD. I didn't have to do a dissertation. I had to do a capstone project that focuses mainly on apologetics, but it does have quite a bit to do. As a matter of fact, my project had quite a bit to do with biblical geography and area in which the Bible comments upon. And me, being a former soldier, has had the opportunity to travel and experience many of those locations that are discussed in the Bible. I mean, I've been to Babylon. I got to go to Babylon. I've been to Nineveh, courtesy of the United States Army. Not that I wanted to go there, but anyway, and I've, my wife and I have traveled to Israel. I've just had been blessed to travel to all those places and learn firsthand and see firsthand places of the Bible.
Lucky you. And as an American, I mean, you've had a chance now to review at least some of my work. How do you feel about what I'm presenting here? I mean, because I believe that there's been a huge effort, a large concerted effort by all sorts of secularists, for whatever reasons, to undermine the Christian founding of America, to present the founding fathers as everything from Satanists to Freemasons to anything and everything but Christian. And they've done a fair job. I mean, they've created a lot of confusion. Your thoughts on it?
Right. Well, what you are teaching is essentially what was taught in our schools 50 years ago when I was growing up. And over the years, that traditional view of American history has been pushed out and supplanted by this progressive America is evil type ideology, and anything that can be used in order to diminish the reputation of America and its history is used and is emphasized and is placed. And the one thing that I emphasized in last week's show was that if it is in the state standards, it has to be taught. And a lot of this traditional history that you have talked about in your videos here is not in the state standards. And what is in the state standards is this revisionist type history of founding fathers not being Christian, and what we were talking about earlier as far as some of the influences or the evil influences that some of the founding fathers were subjected to. So therefore, all of the founding fathers were evil, and the American institution itself was founded upon evil premisi. And and again. So what you're doing is refreshing, and it should be a return. But we should, as a country, especially at the state levels, go back to and start emphasizing in the state's social studies standards.
I think so. We need to recapture the culture. We have been on the ropes. However, they've pushed too far. They've played their hand. They've showed their hand. And I think at this point, we know now who we are dealing with, what we are dealing with. And I think we have the facts on our side. We have the truth on our side. There's a mountain of evidence on our side. And I believe we can win here. We can take back the culture. And also, I also believe if America falls, we all fall. America is that last bastion, and America must stand. So this is why I am doing this. I believe we've now got at least a 4-year period where we can start to work to reclaim the culture. And hopefully there'll be 12 years. Hopefully when President J.D. Vance takes the stage, we can continue with that, once the emperor steps down, and then we can hopefully
Right.
continue with this push to reclaim the culture and take it back from woke. All right, let's dive into this. Any last word, Eric, before I jump into the presentation? Okay, let me bring this up. All right, so this is one nation under God, America, a Christian nation. Now, let's start off with the old Deluder Satan Act of 1647. Now, Massachusetts passed the old Deluder Satan Act in 1647, laying the basis for public schools in America. So it's odd that the basis for public schools in America, before it was subverted by the technocratic secular communists in the late 1800s, was actually based on a religious law. So the Puritans valued literacy very highly. They believed that all individuals should be able to read, especially read the Bible. They also thought that everyone should be able to interpret the Bible for themselves, which I think would just lead to chaos, and has. But in 1642, Massachusetts had required parents to ensure their children's ability to read. So, and 5 years later, in this act, the state mandated community schooling. And the whole purpose behind reading was to read the Bible. Remember, I've mentioned already earlier that America had the highest literacy rate in the world, even for girls. And the main thrust behind this was that they were taught to read the Bible. Now, the act required towns to support teachers for their children. And the religious basis of the act was explicit. The act stated its intention was to thwart the old deluder, Satan, in his goal to keep men from the knowledge of the scriptures. Eric, would you infer from this that obviously this has nothing to do with the Bible, Christianity, and they simply wanted to be able to read their tax reports?
No. When you start looking at the colonial period in our country, especially the Puritans, who were heavily persecuted in England themselves, they were running away from this idea that you can't read the Bible for yourself, because look at the struggle that they went for all those centuries just to have it translated into the common language of the English language itself. So when you start talking about these people being motivated to, number one, get away from that type of persecution that Puritans went through, they're also wanting to educate their posterity to have the same values and precepts that they do, of being able to read the Bible on your own, interpret it on your own, with having some mother church like the Anglican Church tell you what everything means. So yeah, it's just the opposite of what is being taught.
Right. Now, so there was a mandate so the law was a mandate for community schools. So the act required every town in Massachusetts Bay Colony with more than 50 families to hire and maintain a teacher to instruct all children in reading and writing. So these religious fanatics, who are of course anti-education, anti-science, and as who are these? Ask Sham Harris. He'll tell you that that's exactly what Christians are, right? They have no interest in education and reason and writing, of course not. And towns with more than 100 families were further mandated to establish a high school, and they had to prepare students for university, specifically Harvard College. That goes against the grain in terms of the story by people like Richard Dawkins, Sham Harris, in that Christians are supposed to be backwards. So they explicitly wanted an educated population who were literate. And if you look at the Revolutionary War, if you read the letters by the soldiers, the common soldiers who fought in the Revolutionary War, they would put sophomores at Harvard and Yale to shame with the quality of their written language. It's amazing. Read some of these letters and you're like, I need a dictionary to figure out what this guy was saying, because his use of diction is so good. Your thoughts, Eric?
Well, one thing that when you look at the colonial period and how educated all of the children were, and I can't remember where I read this at, but children in the third grade had to be fluent in Latin and or Greek, in addition to English. So they not only had to be able to, write well in the English language, but also be able to speak and read and write a foreign language. Now that's the third grade. Now, as you progress up through the grades, of course, that proficiency is going to increase. And the other thing that I was going to say about Harvard College, if you go to Harvard today, and when we think of Harvard today, what are we thinking? We're thinking about all these pro-Palestinian protests going on, and we're thinking about the president getting fired for whatever it was, not protecting the civil rights of the Jewish kids, and her herself was something with plagiarism, if I'm not mistaken. But when we went up to Boston a couple years ago, and I was looking at some of the symbols on some of the oldest gates at Harvard, and they're all Christian symbols, because Harvard was founded upon the idea of developing an advanced education to further teach preachers to go preach the Word of God. And they had a Department of Theology at one time, but now it's a Department of Religion. So they've changed it from a famous evangelist in the United States, a guy by the name of R.C. Sproul. I'm not sure if you ever heard of this guy, but he talked extensively about this, of how colleges have changed from having departments of theology to having departments of religion, and they're no longer focused on training preachers, and how we've moved away from that, like we had mentioned earlier, the last half, or if not more, of a century in our country.
Yeah, no, things have significantly changed. I mean, these were all founded as Christian universities, and now, of course, that they've been infiltrated and occupied by the secularists and then by the woke madness. Obviously, they want to deny history. They want to rewrite and, as you say, revise the history. So the financial responsibility primarily fell on the towns themselves rather than on individual parents. This is not to say that individual parents, if you had less than 50 families, wouldn't take on that role to find a teacher to teach their children. So the act also mandated that towns with a certain population support educational initiatives, and the taxes or fines from the community would typically fund these schools. So you knew exactly where your taxes were going. In this case, taxation was not theft, taxation was education. So they were motivated by very strong religious belief. So the act was motivated by a religious belief, as stated explicitly in its preamble. They wanted to thwart the old deluder or deceiver, Satan, from keeping men from the knowledge of the scriptures. The Puritans believed that literacy and the ability to read were essential for both temporal living and your salvation. Towns that did not comply with the mandates were subject to a fine of £5. £5 in South African rupees is probably like $1 billion today. I mean, I'm sure that was a lot of money back then. So, and this money would then be paid to the nearest school to fund the nearest school until the town established the necessary educational facility. This ensured the community took educational responsibilities very seriously. Now remember, since, as Andrew Martin said, Trump has decided to shut the Department of Education, and there's going to be a lot of bleating, wailing, and gnashing of teeth, and move it back to the states. Now, something that people do need to realize, the way the Constitution of America was set up, the states had preeminence, the separate states, the individual states, had preeminence over the federal government. The federal government in the Constitution only has the right to do 20 things, a very limited number of things. Of course, this has now been inverted and turned on its head, and now the federal government sits on top of the states, and of course, it has its finger in every pie imaginable. This was not in the original Constitution, so the states should take responsibility for themselves and decide, because they're closest to the people, and they decide on an individual basis rather than fiat mandates from the top. Eric, your thoughts before I go on?
That you're speaking of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, because the 10th Amendment specifically says that any power not enumerated in the Constitution for the federal government is reserved to the states. So when we start talking about education and how the federal government has infiltrated our educational systems in a bad way, mind you, this is why there was so much blowback when they had, what was this called? It was just like 5, maybe 10, not even 10 years ago, where there was this influence going through our nation and in the schools, where the federal government wanted all of the school systems, let's say the school systems for Mississippi, to be teaching the same thing that the school systems in California would teach, which would be the same thing in Minnesota and the same thing in Connecticut. And you can't have that. This because they have different we have different values within our country. When we look at when the Constitution was written, and these powers that were enumerated for the federal government, they were very, very limited. Why? Because we're moving away from the Articles of Confederation, they were extremely limited, and as a matter of fact, too limited. It made the federal government much too weak in order to effectively govern the country. But when you look at what the Constitution, as it was set up, the majority of the power still laid in the states, in the state legislatures. Here's a great thing that people might not know. The United States Senate was not popularly elected until I believe the early 1900s. I can't remember which amendment it was. It was elected by the state legislature. So if the state legislatures are electing your state senators to represent you in the federal government, which each state only has 2, you are going to be closer to understanding who is involved in your state legislatures, which are much more closer to you as a citizen within that state than even your federal congressman is. So all of these issues that we're talking about, especially when it comes to education, were more closely held at the state level and the local levels. But now there's this top-down type ideology where we are going to tell the states what they are going to teach, what their standards are going to be, and proficiency is. And if you don't meet it, we're going to cut your funding off. Well, guess what? The emperor is going to cut the funding off for the Department of Education.
Let's hope so. And also, since President Carter opened the Department of Education, U.S. education went from number 1 worldwide and is now number 24 and falling lower. Number 24 if we're feeling generous. And by the way, £5 in the 1600s is $1,500 to $1,900 US dollars today. And welcome back, Artsy Fartsy Nerdy Wordy. I just like the name. It's so nice to say. So welcome back. Good to see you again. So yeah, no, I'm hopefully going to be able to fix a lot of this. And guys, if you like this, the first 99 slides are available on my coffee shop. You can get it here. It's $5 if you want to. I have pinned it in the chat if you want the pinned link. So if you want to buy this and use it for apologetics or polemics purposes, or for your own education or for teaching classes in Sunday school, whatever it is, you can get the first 99 slides there. I will update the rest soon. But if you're interested, please do go to my coffee shop and get it there. Okay, let's continue. So parents were encouraged to ensure their children's education and could be taxed indirectly to support the schools. The Act's enforcement meant that local governments had a direct obligation to establish and fund the teachers and educational institutions. This meant it was community funded, not even state funded. But this was valid across the state at that time. So this is not something that should be handled at federal level, but at local level by people who care about the problem. So the community as a whole was responsible for fulfilling the educational mandate. In 1675, William Scant of Braintree, Massachusetts, came before the court for breaking this act. And more than a century after the old Deluder Act was passed, John Adams drafted the Massachusetts Constitution with a guarantee of public education for all citizens. So religious-based citizens took action long before the government did so. So hopefully that shows you the religious basis for education in the U.S. Any comment before I move on, Eric?
No, we're good.
Okay, let's go to the Pledge of Allegiance.
His comment on Squanto and the Mayflower and learning that relationship that they had between the Pilgrims and I can't remember what the name of the Indian tribe was that Squanto belonged to, but it was I can't remember. It's not, well, it is important, but it's not important to the conversation. But we used to of the Native Americans, prominent Native Americans that our state teaches, Squanto, Pocahontas, Sacagawea, and there was one more. I can't remember. There was 4 of them that we had to know, and Squanto was one of them. So if you ask any of my students, who's Squanto, because it's the essence. I can't remember who. It doesn't matter anyway. But I like that comment.
All right. So Oh, so sorry. So, guys,
There you
Sergeant
go.
Grinch is undergoing treatment for his health, so please keep him in your thoughts and your prayers. And Artsy Fartsy has been away because she's been ill, so also keep her in your thoughts and prayers, guys. But great to have you back, Artsy Fartsy. Good to see you. Thanks for your presence. Okay, let's continue. She says Squanto. I have no idea who Squanto was. Was a Christian at the end. Never knew that.
Squanto was a Native American who helped the Pilgrims. He taught them where to hunt, where to fish, what to plant, and thus, as a matter of fact, that's how apropos it thus enabled them to, because that first winter they were there, they starved to death. Half of them died, for Pete's sake. And then that spring, they hooked up with this Squanto fella from the Wanapago tribe, Poneg tribe. I can't ever pronounce that, but anyway, she posted it forth. He taught them where to hunt, where to fish, how to grow crops, and that fall they had harvested enough and stored enough food to where they realized that they were not going to starve during the winter like they had the previous year. And this is where they had the first Thanksgiving dinner, and they invited the Indians, the local Indians.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah. Hopefully you'll find this all very educational for the audience. Hopefully you'll find it very educational, and hopefully you'll find reason to investigate further, to go read further, to go look at the facts for yourselves, and add to this knowledge, so that you get a fuller picture and aren't deceived by propaganda. All right, so the Pledge of Allegiance. Propagandists leverage Eisenhower's 1954 amendment to the Pledge of Allegiance to argue that the United States was never a Christian nation, just like certain people argue against the late, shall we say, doctrine of the Trinity, which isn't explicitly named in the Bible, to say that the Trinity was never in the Bible. That's exactly the same thing. Sometimes things have to be made explicit, or things have to be adapted in the face of certain adversities. However, so they say, well, in 1954, do you know that actually there was never a mention of God in the Pledge of Allegiance? In fact, it was never supposed to be there, but Eisenhower, that sneaky bastard, came in and he added the words "under God." He was, oh my God, it was horrific, a crime against humanity by putting God into the government. Well, yeah, he wasn't the first time it was done. In fact, there have been several versions of the pledge. The pledge has been updated more than once. That was just one specific time for a very specific purpose. In 1892, the Pledge of Allegiance was changed. I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In 1890, I can't hear the words "and justice for all" without thinking of Al Pacino in the movie from way back in the day. What's it, the early 80s? And justice for all. Maybe I'm giving away my age now. Okay, 1890. Sorry?
What movie is this?
Al Pacino and Justice for All.
I don't remember the movie. Sorry.
Al Pacino hadn't started shaving then yet, so it was a while back. I was much younger then. All right, so 1892 to 1923. I pledge allegiance to my flag and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Then in 1924, it changed. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. Now, I just want you to realize that the allegiance was actually to whatever country you happened to feel that you were allegiant to on that day. So the Pledge of Allegiance was never a pledge to the United States. But some sneaky guy put the words United States in there in 1924, thereby corrupting it, because actually it was the Pledge of Allegiance to what, the Eskimo country? Eric, do you think?
Maybe not the Eskimos, but definitely the northwestern part of our country with the Native American tribes up there. Maybe
Canada. Maybe it was the Pledge of Allegiance to Canada, and they put the United States in to cause corruption in the land. It's possible, right? And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I mean, it would be ridiculous to argue that adding the words United States was a corruption of the pledge, because obviously it was meant for the United States.
The common word used to describe our country in all of these pledges is it's a republic, not a democracy.
Yeah, exactly.
To the republic for which it stands, not the democracy.
And eventually, in 54, they added the words of America. because it was the United States
I didn't
of.
realize that there was this many changes. I
don't think this is all of them, but yeah, this is probably. And then eventually in '54 it changed again. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So the phrase under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance during a period marked by Cold War and the fear of communism, and I must say godless communism. So the initiative was driven by a desire to differentiate the United States from the Soviet Union, which promoted atheism as part of its state ideology. These were atheists. The United States was a Christian nation. It differentiated itself on the basis of its Christian identity, Christian values, versus a godless, atheistic nation. Any thought, Eric?
They're a bunch of commies. That's why.
Yep, exactly. And
So
atheism and communism.
And we needed to dislike them immensely. Is what we were taught.
Yeah, no, so President Dwight D. Eisenhower supported the inclusion of the phrase as a way to reinforce the nation's religious heritage and religious Christian moral values. The Knights of Columbus, a Catholic fraternal organization, played a significant role in advocating for the change. The additions were intended to unite Americans around a common belief in a higher power during a time of national fear and doubt and uncertainty. Supporters believed that invoking God in the pledge would strengthen American identity and values against this backdrop of global tensions. The change was officially approved by Congress and signed into law on June 14, 1954. It's House Joint Resolution 243, and this change is entirely in keeping with American Christian heritage. Any comment before I go on, Eric?
Eisenhower was, when we look at Dwight Eisenhower, he was probably coming, because of course you had Truman right before him, but he was probably the best Republican president of the century until we got Ronaldus Maximus in 1980, of course.
True, Ronaldus Maximus. You're right. You're right. There was him. But he made a couple of things, like amnesty. He should never have caved on amnesty. But then again, I'm not even American. What the heck am I commenting?
Yeah, I agree. Of course, not everybody's perfect. But when you look
and he opened the madhouses, and now you've got woke everywhere.
He what now?
He basically opened up all the insane asylums, and people walked out, and mental illness flooded U.S. society. That's another issue.
That's, like I said, there's some things that he did that we can not agree with.
Little man, very welcome.
Eisenhower was an immigration beast. I don't know how many people he deported, but he had one of these deportation programs that I think Trump is going to try to rival.
It's what people want. I mean, it's very much what people want.
Well, it isn't that we don't want immigrants in our country. It's just that the problem is that we have a process for it. We have laws for it. And all of these people who have flooded in here have violated that process. And the only thing that we want is we just want the law to actually be enforced and to be and applied. And all these people that came in here breaking
laws are a sin against.
Try again.
Laws are a crime against the virtue of compassion, Eric.
Yeah, well, and this is what you get. I mean, this is what, and I have a feeling this is all we're going to be hearing for the next 4 years. But he definitely picked the right guy to run that. If you've ever listened to anything that Tom Homan and the guy he's a beast, and I'm glad to see that he was the one that was picked.
Yeah, look, this is going to lead to confrontation, and I mean they have no choice but to win this, to run roughshod over resistance. But let's continue. So, dedication of our nation to the Almighty. When I say our nation, I'm not American. I'm an honorary American. I'm going to come across the border and get a passport and some free money later. Although, of course, the Democrats would kick me out because I'm not going to vote for the left, so they're not going to let me in anyway. I'm not the right kind of immigrant, but that's a story for another day. President Eisenhower, statement upon signing the bill. He said, from this day forward, the millions of our school children will daily proclaim in every city and town, every village and rural schoolhouse, the dedication of our nation and our people to the Almighty. In this way, we are reaffirming the transcendence of religious faith in America's heritage and future. In this way, we shall constantly strengthen these spiritual weapons, which forever will be our country's most powerful resource in peace or war. So this bill was part of Public Law 396 of the 83rd Congress, and there's a link here. It's real. On July 20, 1956, Congress proclaimed that the national motto of the United States is, "In God we trust." Notice, not Allah, not the flying spaghetti monster, not in the atheist God, which is themselves, but in God, the Christian God. And that motto is inscribed above the main door of the Senate, behind the chair of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and on the currency of the United States. In God we trust, all others pay cash. Your thoughts, Eric, before I go on.
Well, of course, you start seeing this just as soon as Eisenhower left office, what happened to all of these references to God and our faith in Him? They immediately became under attack with the hippie movement in the 60s, and of course the Vietnam era that our country went through. So all of this stuff that he added to it was almost immediately. I mean, they took the prayer out of the schools. What was that? O'Hare, Madeline Mary O'Hare, whatever her name was. You get prayer taken out of the school. So all these good things that he did were almost automatically diminished just as soon as the 60s rolled around.
Okay, no, understood. Yeah, of course. I mean, you've got the left constantly fighting to introduce communism, which they've been very close to implementing, and we've seen it, partly implemented. All right, now for the U.S. government endorsement and historical justification of this pledge, we have to go to this link here. This is from the U.S. codehouse.gov. So this is an official U.S. government website. There are other websites where the text is a little bit clearer. It's a bit easier to read, but I brought this one up simply because it is from the official U.S. government website. So this is from the U.S. Code, House.gov, right, House of Representatives. And I'm going to go to a couple of these things. I want to go through these. I want you to see. And right, this is the statutory notes and related subsidiaries findings from the U.S. government. And they tell you, November 11, 1620, prior to embarking for the shores of America, the Pilgrims signed the Mayflower Compact that declared, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. So the U.S. government is stating that the founding of America, the people who came to America to settle it and found the country, eventually the colonies that made the country, did so for religious reasons. And they intended to spread the Christian faith. And they acknowledged this. On July 4th, 1776, America's fathers, after appealing to the laws of nature and of nature's God to justify their separation from Britain, declared, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." In 1781, Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence and later the third president, in his work titled Notes on the States of Virginia, wrote that God, who gave us life, gave us liberty. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of people that these liberties are the gift of God? I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. So, clearly a religious basis. I'll do a couple more. So, May 14, 1787, George Washington, president of the Constitutional Convention, admonished and exhorted the delegates and declared, "If to please the people we offer what we ourselves disapprove, how can we defend our work? Let us raise a standard to which the wise and honest can repair. The event is in the hand of God." And it goes on and on. I'll go to number 11 here, just to skip ahead. Now, June 17, 1963, Supreme Court of the United States, Abington School District versus Schempp, in which compulsory school prayer was held unconstitutional. Justices Goldberg and Harlan, concurring the decision, stated, "But untutored devotion to the concept of neutrality can lead to invocation or approval of results, which partake not simply of that non-interference and non-involvement, this is really complex language, with the religious, which the Constitution commands. So I'll just skip ahead here. Neither government nor this court can or should ignore the significance of the fact that a vast portion of our people believe in and worship God, and that many of our legal, political, and personal values derive historically from religious teachings. Government must take cognizance of the existence of religion, and the First Amendment may require that it do so. So, in other words, religion in schools, praying in schools is legal under the First Amendment. And I'll do number 12, March 5th, 1984.
Let me just add to that. We still, every day in the school systems that I taught in, we would say the Pledge of Allegiance. It was compulsory. Well, I didn't make the kids say it, but they definitely had to stand up for it. Because you can't make kids, it's the same thing with prayer. You cannot compel them to pray, but we do still have a moment of silence every day in the school system. So if students choose to pray, that provides them an opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
Just that you cannot force them or lead them in a prayer, as that leads to some form of, construed as some form of government sanctioning of religion.
But the government is not neutral in the face of religion, in the sense that the government, as we've been describing in this series, has a preference for Christianity, no particular group, no particular denomination, but the government is based on Christian principles. And therefore it should favor and should be a Christian government with Christian-derived laws. I'll do one more. Now also notice that Christianity in the US is very much under legal attack. In all public spaces, in all civic spaces, it is under attack. The ACLU has been one organization that has gone hard after Christian culture in all sorts of public spaces. 84, Supreme Court, Lynch versus Donnelly, in which a city government's display of a nativity scene was held to be unconstitutional. The Chief Justice, writing for the court, Chief Justice Berger, there's an unbroken history of official acknowledgement by all three branches of government of the role of religion in American life from at least 1789, and this is government acknowledgement. Examples of reference to our religion. Oops, my bad. What did I just do there?
I don't know. Number 13, I think, or no.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I made a wrong mistake there. Examples of reference to our religious heritage are found in the statutorily prescribed national motto, "In God We Trust," which Congress and the President mandated for our currency, and in the language, "One Nation, under God," as part of the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. That pledge is recited by many thousands of public school children and adults every year. Art galleries supported by public revenues display religious paintings of the 15th and 16th centuries, predominantly inspired by one religious faith. Well, exclusively, I would say. The National Gallery in Washington, maintained with government support, has long exhibited masterpieces with religious messages, notably The Last Supper, and paintings depicting the birth of Christ, the crucifixion and the resurrection, among many others with explicit Christian themes and messages. And of course, they speak of Moses with the Ten Commandments, and Congress has long provided chapels in the Capitol for religious worship and meditation. And the final one I will do. June 4, 1985, Supreme Court versus Wallace and Jaffrey, in which a mandatory moment of silence to be used for meditation or voluntary prayer was held unconstitutional. Justice O'Connor, concurring in the judgment and addressing the contention that the court's holding would render the Pledge of Allegiance unconstitutional, because Congress amended it in 1954 to add the words "under God," stated in my view the words "under God" in the prayer serve as an acknowledgement of religion with the legitimate secular purpose of solemnizing public occasions and expressing confidence in the future. These are government writings endorsing the fact that religion is part and parcel of the legal and cultural political fabric of America. I'll pause there. I think I've done enough. I've proved the point, I think. Your thoughts, Eric, before I go further?
Well, being in the military, you take an oath, and at the end of the oath, you have the words "So help me God." But now, what we've allowed our service members to do is, when they begin the oath, it says, "I do solemnly swear," support that I will support and defend the Constitution. Okay, you say I affirm instead of solemnly swear, and then those words, when you do that at the very end of it, so help me God, are taken off of the oath. So we even provide our soldiers the ability to get away from this idea of God. But again, this is a distortion of what has been, decided by the Supreme Court. And if you know anything about the Supreme Court and history behind the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court are the final arbiters of what the Constitution means and the Bill of Rights means. And, that's Marbury versus Madison type stuff. And when they rule on this is what states are legally bound to, the laws are legally bound to follow.
Yeah. And then also the court acknowledges legal absurdities. For instance, there was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals erroneously held that the Pledge of Allegiance use of the express religious reference under God violates the First Amendment. So someone took the First Amendment to court, took the Pledge of Allegiance to court because it says under God because they're not Christian, and damn it, that's illegal. And so therefore a school district's policy and practice of teacher-led voluntary recitations of the Pledge of Allegiance is unconstitutional. You can't say the Pledge of Allegiance, it's against the Constitution. The erroneous rationale, the wrong, in other words, these thick-headed people, these courts, would lead to the absurd result that the Constitution's use of the year of our Lord in Article 7 violates the First Amendment of the Constitution. And therefore, a school district's policy and practice of teacher-led recitations of the Constitution would itself be unconstitutional. So according to the legal absurdities that have many times occurred, the Constitution is unconstitutional.
Right.
And this has happened in court many times.
What is that fallacy, logical absurdum or something like that, where it just becomes so absurd when we start talking about the Establishment Clause? And the Establishment Clause is actually, the Establishment Clause it's not found in the original Constitution. The Establishment Clause is part of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, the first addition to the Constitution, was not ratified until 1791, I believe it was, 1792, somewhere around there. And then the Establishment Clause specifically states, Congress shall make no law establishing or respecting the establishment of a religion. But they always forget what else it says. It says, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So you got guys like this virulent atheist, Newdow, who brought that case to the court system. It just exposes his hypocrisy for not reading the entirety of the Establishment Clause itself. And this is what it leads to. It leads to idiots like him filing court cases saying, well, we can't say under God anywhere. Why? Because that says the federal government is establishing an official religion. No, it's not. And the reason, let me just say one more thing about that. The reason why our founding fathers wanted that Establishment Clause in there, and they also included a religious test within the Constitution for federal workers to say that you can't hold somebody to make them belong to a certain religion, is because of the Anglican Church, the colonial experiences with the Church of England. Many of these precepts that we find in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and subsequent case law deal with the colonial experience with the Church of with England itself at the colonial period, and its imposition of the Anglican precepts upon the American people themselves, and they didn't want anything.
They were punishing people, imprisoning people. So briefly, the Anglican Church was extremely, they were oppressive. They were imprisoning people. They were beating people. They were hurting people who didn't follow those precepts. And don't forget, the Anglican Church is a state church. It is a state-controlled church. It is an instrument of the state. And so this is something that Washington especially wanted to get away from. So yeah, but I will mention that. I will come back to that point.
What you said though, the very people at the beginning of your presentation, the Puritans, wanted to purify. This is where they got their name. They wanted to purify the Anglican Church because of all its corruption. So therefore, they were persecuted, saying that, well, then that is considered treasonous type opinions and behavior. Why? Who's in charge of the Church of England? The king. So to criticize the king is treasonous. To criticize the Anglican Church is the same thing as criticizing the king. So this is why they were so heavily persecuted. And the colonists wanted to get completely away from this. Is what the First Great Awakening was about, is to get away from that authoritative government-sanctioned religion upon the people. And that's American.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Christianity in the colonial era. So the First Virginia Charter, 1605, established the first permanent English settlements. King James stated that part of his purpose in granting permission to settle in America was for the propagating of the Christian religion and the true knowledge and worship of God. So they came to America to propagate the Christian religion and to spread true knowledge of the worship of God, which sounds very Christian to me. I could be wrong, but I'm going to take a wild guess here. Georgia was the last English colony formed, 1732. And up to that time, charters for America's 13 colonies reflected Christian influence. Documents like the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut of 1639 called for governance aligned with God's will to maintain peace and preserve the gospel. The belief in an absent God, a deist God, at least the modern idea of a deist God, which is completely different to the concept of a deist God back then, was never promoted in the charters and laws of the English colonies. There is zero evidence of deism, of atheism, and of crazy, rampant Freemason influence in any of these charters. Conspiracy theories aside, I love a good conspiracy theory, sure. I love watching Ancient Aliens, it's great stuff, but man, you might don't want to believe everything you read. In fact, I got pulled over recently. I was driving down the highway. Cop stopped me and said, "Look, man, didn't you see the sign? It says 50 and you were doing 90." I said, "Look, man, I don't believe everything I read." So be like me, okay? Don't believe everything you read. Sorry, Eric. Your thoughts?
That would never fly. I mean, of course, that doesn't fly. But the fundamental orders of Connecticut, when we start looking at these first that developed in the colonies and in America, the Mayflower Compact, this is the first example of self-rule, religious self-rule, but self-rule nonetheless. The fundamental orders of Connecticut, where they're extending not only religious rights to the individual, but also individual rights, individual freedoms, individual liberties to the individual. So all of these things that you're naming here are really first that we start seeing in the not just the English-speaking world, but also the Western world, where you have the Judeo-Christian ethic. This is where you start first seeing it applied and these ideas being developed and codified. So the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut are really your first Bill of Rights that you would see in the colonies anyway. But I'm trying to think when the English Bill of Rights, when those were dated. I'll look. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we can always do it next time. You know, just prep some notes, and you've got the slides now. And all right. So, for as much as it hath pleased Almighty God, for the wise disposition of His divine providence to order and dispose of things. Don't forget, providence means God is active in the world. God takes an interest, and He actively moves things to benefit His creatures, to benefit His plan for the world and for His creatures, which again is contradictory to deism. So that proves it false. We, the inhabitants and residents of Windsor, Hartford, and Wethersfield, acknowledging that where people are gathered together, the word of God requires that to maintain the peace and union of such a people, there should be an orderly and decent government established according to God. An orderly and decent government established according to God. They didn't say according to atheism, according to socialism. This is to maintain and preserve the liberty and purity of the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ that we now profess, as well as the discipline of the churches, which according to the truth of the said gospel is now practiced among us. So that sounds religious to me. I could be wrong, but that sounds a little bit Christian.
It is distinctly religious. Of course, I looked up the Bill of Rights for England. This is why I'm saying the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut were revolutionary. of their time, but also when we look at it today, the English Bill of Rights established by England were not established until 1689, which was a full 60 years after the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. So when we start looking at the English Bill of Rights was based on the Magna Carta. I would agree with that somewhat. The Magna Carta was mainly
it was a fundamental statement of the freedom of the people.
1203 comes to mind, but
well, let's not speculate. I mean, neither of us have notes on this. Neither of us have done any prep on this. So let's lay off that. I mean, we've got enough to deal with here.
Yeah, 1215. But the Magna Carta just basically extended rights to the nobility, not really the individual itself. And it basically said that the king has to actually follow the laws that he makes, and he just can't arbitrarily, nullify a law. But when you start seeing the hardcore English Bill of Rights, the English Bill of Rights are where you start enumerating rights given to English citizens. But also keep in mind the colonists, this is where, you start looking at these little uppityness. They thought they were Englishmen themselves. So all of these rights that are awarded to Englishmen, such as representation in Parliament, they thought that was their right also. So this,
well, don't forget though that if you look at Blackstone, which I covered previously prior to your episode, English law was the basis for American law, and that was explicitly Christian. English law was derived explicitly from Christian principles. Justin Wooten says, be negative, only see the dark side, only be negative, be pessimistic, don't be positive, everything is bad, roll over, play dead, hide under your bed. Thanks, Justin. Moving on. On May 15, 1776, now we go to the national era, the Continental Congress passed a resolve to encourage individual states to form their own governments. Connecticut and Rhode Island retained documents that had governed their colonies, and both were started by Christian ministers. Oh my golly, they weren't started by atheists, therefore they were not based on reason, because you can only use reason if you're an atheist. I mean, you wouldn't start universities, you wouldn't get people to read, educate them, and send them to university unless you're an atheist. I mean, Christians don't do that. Christians want you to be illiterate, right, Eric?
Yeah, of course. But we're talking about Connecticut and Rhode Island here. You got Roger Williams in Rhode Island, and Thomas Hooker, I think his name was, established Connecticut. This is where people start looking at and saying, okay, this is where we've lost our ever-loving mind. The Puritans were persecuted in England, so therefore they flee England to come to the colonies, to establish a colony, to get away from that persecution. Well, what did the Puritans start doing? They start practicing Congregationalism and persecuting those people who did not wholeheartedly agree with their religious views. So here we start seeing this religious freedoms by Roger Williams and by Thomas Hooker, establishing colonies based on religious freedom and not being told what they had to believe by, again, a governmental authority telling you what you have to believe as a religious practice. We had the Anglican Church, persecuted the Pilgrims, persecuted the Puritans. They flee that, and then the Puritans come here and start practicing the very same things that they were fleeing. And so when you get people like Thomas Hooker and Roger Williams, you have people who are saying, look, you guys have lost your vision. You've lost your way.
Right. So the Continental Congress wanted individual states to form their own governments. They were encouraging this. And Connecticut and Rhode Island retained their original documents, again, both founded by ministers. A report submitted by Congress's Committee of the Judiciary in 1854 noted the strong Christian influence. Had the people, and I opened with this in the beginning of the series, had the people during the Revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, the American Revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. Pennsylvania ratified its first constitution in 1776, requiring members of the state assembly to affirm belief in one God and acknowledge the scriptures as divinely inspired. The president of Pennsylvania State Constitutional Convention was a guy called an atheist, Martian, Freemason, Satanist, Buddhist called Benjamin Franklin, who decided that all people had to affirm belief in one God and acknowledge that the scriptures were divinely inspired. Makes sense, right, Eric?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
Pennsylvania was like the one of the most liberal colonies. They were founded based on William Penn, of course, who was a Quaker, and they were the ones that were the first to start recognizing the rights of the Native Americans, the rights of women to speak up publicly and have positions of authority in the public. So when you start talking about Benjamin Franklin standing for Christian principle, those are indeed Christian principles of loving thy neighbor, which included the Native Americans, which included, of course, women.
Yeah, no, I love thy neighbor, but don't get caught. These are very important things that we have to think about. But moving on, sorry about that. Massachusetts completed its I think you can see Benjamin Franklin here was heavily promoting Christian doctrine. So whatever claims you hear about Benjamin Franklin, take them with a large bag of salt. Okay. Massachusetts completed its constitution on June 15, 1780, with John Adams as chief architect. Article 3 emphasized the importance of piety, religious piety, religion being Christianity, and morality being Christian, biblical morality, for the good order of civil government. So yeah, Christians make for good citizens, and Christian principles make for good governance, asserting the right for legislatures to support public worship and Protestant teachers. Right. Now, they were very specific about being Protestant because, unfortunately, there was a little bit of, shall we say, anti-Catholic bias going on, but different story, another day. The Committee of the Judiciary observed that at the adoption of the Constitution, most states provided funding for the support of the church. The states actively supported the church, just as regularly as they provided money for government services. Every colony sustained Christianity in some form until the Revolution. So colonial charters and state constitutions reflect the significant role of Christianity in the governance of the first 13 colonies and the subsequent states. So all of these charters of the first 13 colonies all were very much Christian-oriented charters. I'll give you an example, the Charter of Delaware, 1701. Because no people can be truly happy, though under the greatest enjoyment of civil liberties, if abridged of the freedom of conscience as to their religious profession and worship, and Almighty God, being the only Lord of conscience, Father of lights and spirits, and the author as well as the object of all divine knowledge, faith, and worship, who only doth enlighten the minds and persuade and convince the understandings of people, I do hereby grant and declare that no person or persons inhabiting in this territory, who shall confess and acknowledge one Almighty God, the Creator, upholder, and ruler of the world, and professes him or themselves obliged to live quietly under the civil government, shall in any case be molested or prejudiced in his or their person or estate, because of his or their conscientious persuasion or practice, nor be compelled to frequent or maintain any religious worship, place, or ministry, contrary to his or their mind, nor to suffer any other act or thing, contrary to their religious persuasion. So this was, as you can see, very explicitly showing an allegiance to God, Christianity, but also allowing freedom of worship. It did not place, though I think we can infer from this, that other religions were of an equal stature, that said, we allow you, if you're not a Christian, to do your thing. But this, of course, has been abused and now been twisted to insist that all these other crazy ideas now have to hold equal sway. And you cannot have all things being equal. So your thoughts, Eric, you're nodding your head there.
Right. Well, many of the initial charters, initial constitutions of the states, the original 13 states, have all kinds of references to religious piety, belief in Jesus Christ, or belief in the Trinitarian God. And it is, when you start reading these, as a matter of fact, when you start reading some of the Constitution, the preambles to some of these constitutions, you're wondering why in this day and age, in this amount of hostility that we see towards Christianity, why haven't they passed some type of constitutional amendment in these states in order to amend their constitution to take that out? Well, the reason is because the majority of the people in this country still believe in God, still hold to the Christian ethos, and still believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So this is why it hasn't happened. If there was that much of a groundswell to take religion out of our government, that is one place. If I was an atheist, that's where I would start. But they can't, because they know that they don't have the majority of the American public on their side.
Yeah. Eric, go to the section, I think not the previous episode, the one before that, where I discussed Blackstone, and it shows that English law as well as American law is derived almost explicitly from, I think it was the book of Leviticus, I believe. So the whole underpinning concept is Leviticus, and then of course there's more that I can add here. If you look at the way that the U.S. government is split into three separate branches, you can find an analogy to that in the Bible in the book of Judges. So, but that's a story for a different day. I'll do that another time. So you will find that there's certainly an Old Testament element to this that can be traced. Right, Fundamental Orders of 1639, Connecticut. So, for as much as it hath pleased Almighty God by his divine providence, okay, I've already covered this, to maintain and preserve the liberty and purity of the gospel of our Lord Jesus, which we now profess. Right, so understand, you're looking at religious law. Now, when I say religious law, I'm not talking about theocracy. We're talking about laws based on Christian principles, to be fair, to be just, to be moral. Because Christianity does not legislate law. It has moral law. It does not legislate civil law. It is not a religion of law the way Islam is with the Sharia. But these laws must enshrine the dignity of man and acknowledge the Christian principles of fairness and truth and justice and honesty. Right. As they speak of here, the discipline of the churches, which according to the truth of the said gospel is now practiced amongst us. Right. And so, yeah. Charter of Georgia, 1732. Catholics, well, GTFO. George II, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France and Ireland, King Defender of the Faith, and so forth. And for as much as the good and prosperous success of the said colony cannot but chiefly depend under the blessing of God. So the colony depends on the blessing of God and support of the royal authority. And then forever hereafter, there shall be a liberty of conscience allowed in the worship of God, except to Catholics. So a little bit of, shall we say, non-inclusiveness, and they should have been a bit more inclusive, but they weren't being inclusive there. So you have the freedom to follow anything you like, except you Catholics pack your bags and GTFO. That's pretty much what it is. So a little bit of non-inclusiveness here. You might notice in the language.
Georgia itself, when it was founded as what they called a buffer colony. James Oglethorpe actually had promised people that he would pay off their debts, get them out of debtor's prison, if they would come and colonize that region of our country. And the reason why is you had all of these Seminole Indians coming out of Florida and raiding, and also coming across, I guess it would include the Cherokee also, and they were raiding these plantations and stealing the slaves of these plantations in South Carolina. So it served as a buffer. These people would agree to fight to defend South Carolina if they would come to Georgia, and they would get this free land. So when you talk about Oglethorpe himself was a deeply religious person, and it wasn't until I think it was after the French and Indian War that Georgia started allowing slavery within its boundaries. So when it is founded, it's founded on all of these precepts that you find from the northern colonies. The majority of the northern colonies had already passed laws in their state legislatures or their colonial legislatures to ban slavery, and the king came in and vetoed every single one of them that did. So this is why when we see the Declaration of Independence signed, you see in all these states, or these colonies, or these states that declaring their independence from England, 7 of the 13 banned slavery just like that. Georgia, unfortunately, had slavery ingrained into it by then, and didn't. But yeah, Catholics that's what they felt about Catholics, because they didn't want to have anything to do with the Catholics. The Catholics were, Maryland was founded by as a Catholic.
Let's not stress about it. Let's just move on. I mean, the point's been made there, I guess. So,
Okay.
Charter of New England, 1620. James, by the grace of God, to advance in the enlargement of Christian religion to the glory of God Almighty, to lay the foundation of a hopeful plantation and have diverse years passed by God's assistance and by the continuance of God's divine blessing. So confident of prosperous success by the continuance of God's divine blessing, we have thought it fit, accordingly to our kingly duty, to follow God's sacred will, rendering reverent thanks to his divine majesty for his gracious favor in laying open and revealing the same unto us before any other Christian prince or state, by which means, without offense, and as we trust to his glory. And Almighty God in his great goodness and bounty towards us and our people. So this is very religious language. This is extremely Christian language. So there is no ambiguity here. U.S. was founded by a Christian people with Christian intentions to be a Christian state. So now we move to Justice Antonin Scalia. Any thoughts before I continue?
No, I want to hear what you got to say about Scalia. I love Scalia.
Yep. So he made the statement regarding the government's role in favoring religion over non-religion during a speech at Archbishop Rummel High School in Metairie, Louisiana. I've listened to the speech. The audio is extremely poor. Unfortunately, it was recorded not that long ago, but the audio is horrible. And I wanted to play like 2 minutes of it, but I'll ponder it. We'll see. I might play it. I might not. So he expressed his long-held belief that the Constitution does not require the government to maintain neutrality between religion and non-religion. He argued that while the government cannot choose between different religions, although I think that is a false position because the government clearly should prefer Christianity. And this is where the court has erred. It can and should favor religion in general. However, I think that is also a false position. There needs to be a nuance there. It favors Christianity because now the government has to now also give Satanism equal pride of place. So as soon as the woke eventually get to the formally declaring the religion of diddling young children, then that also has to be given official pride of place. So, and he says, to tell you the truth, there is no place for the idea that the state must not favor religion over non-religion in our constitutional tradition. Where did that come from? He says, God has been very good to us. That we won the revolution was extraordinary. The Battle of Midway was extraordinary. I think one of the reasons God has been good to us is that we have done him honor. And he means this as an American nation. So this speech and the sentiments were reported by multiple outlets, and you can actually go and see it here. So I wonder if I should actually play this. There's a section. So hold on. Let me just see. Grammar school. Okay, I'm going to read a section rather than play it because the audio, as I said, is extremely hard. And yeah, so let's see what he had to say. Antonin Scalia. When I was in grammar school, right, New York City had a practice called release time. But on Wednesday, if you had a note from your parents, you could get out of school early at 2 o'clock and go to your church and synagogue and get religious instructions. School promoted religious instruction. Well, some, anti-religious organization, probably the ACLU, brought a lawsuit saying that this was unconstitutional. In the 40s, the Supreme Court upheld the practice. Indeed, the pleading was written by William O. Douglas, who God knows was not a religious man or a conservative. But he said it was his opinion for the court, we are a religious people whose institutions presuppose a supreme being. I covered that last week. When the state accommodates its practices to the religious needs of our people, it acts in the best of our traditions. And so the program was uncut. 20 years later, the Supreme Court does a 180-degree flip and adopts the neutrality principle. The state must be neutral between religion and non-religion. This is a false position because the state has now adopted the official religion of woke. That's exactly what happened here. They adopted the secularist religion. I've covered secularism extensively over multiple episodes. It is a religious movement based on atheism, based on Unitarianism, and I will get into Unitarianism. That's something I'm working on right now, which I think is one of the most pernicious, insidious ideas that has come out in a long time. So, to tell you the truth, there's no place for that in our constitutional tradition. Where do we come from? The same Congress that proposed the Bill of Rights, that proposed the First Amendment, the same Congress instructed George Washington, the president, to proclaim a day of thanksgiving. So observed, thanking the Almighty for all his blessings to the country. Where is this notion that you cannot favor religion over non-religion? To be sure, you cannot favor one denomination over another, but you cannot favor religion over non-religion. Your thoughts, Eric, before I go on? I don't want to dwell too long on these ideas.
When you start looking at somebody who actually understood, and you look at some of the decisions that he made, he understands the governing principles in which our nation was founded upon, and then you turn that on its head and start looking at some of the other people that served with him and the decisions that they made and the comments that they made with them. They're so devoid of a historical context. It just makes you sick. And it's just this new application of the Constitution. And the Constitution is what I say it is and says this is where we get, controversial decisions like Roe v. Wade. And the entire country fights over it for 50 years until it's finally rectified. You miss
and I agree with
constructionists like Scalia.
Yeah, we must favor Christianity over non-religion, over non-Christianity. So he says on 9/11, his wife and he were in Rome. The president gave a speech and ended the speech with God bless. The next morning, I met some judges from other countries who had watched the speech, and one said to me, how I wish that the president or prime minister of my country at a time of national crisis or emergency could say, God bless whatever the name of the country is. God bless Spain. God bless the UK. Absolutely forbidden in France, in Italy, in Germany, in Spain. This is what the French call the principle of laïcité, the principle of secularism. This is not being neutral. This is imposing a ban on Christianity. This is imposing atheism. And of course, atheism has no calories. It doesn't stand alone. It brings in a lot of empty calories, like socialism with it. Woke comes with it. So public officials are not to invoke the deity. It goes back to Napoleon, and all of the countries that Napoleon conquered adopted this principle. Fortunately, we were never conquered by Napoleon, and we never had that principle. But there are those who want to impose it upon the United States. So I have no problem if they do it democratically. Sure, enact a statute saying the president shall not invoke the deity. If you can get that through, it will never happen. If you did it that way, it would be legitimate. But now, he says they are trying to cram it down the throats of American people that have always honored God on the pretext that the Constitution requires it. So I'll go up to Bismarck, and then I'll end. Your thoughts? You nodded your head there, Eric.
No, this is exactly what I'm talking about. He understands the historical context of the practice of Christianity within our country, and how he's seen how it has basically destroyed. I mean, you look at France. We send missionaries to France, for crying out loud, to teach them about Jesus Christ, because the majority of the people in France don't know Jesus Christ. At least Jesus Christ is taught in the Bible anyway. So when we start looking at what Scalia is posing here or saying here is that this wave that came from the French Revolution has spread for 2 centuries now, over 2 centuries now, and has essentially destroyed any fundamental understanding of of Christianity, the things that the majority of the people believe in. And you're trying to take that away from them in your government by calling it unconstitutional. And they want to bring that to America. I agree. Good luck. Try to get that passed through. Yeah. But what they're doing is they're subverting it. They know if they go through the courts, they can get a lot of things done in the courts that the people don't want. And I'm going to say this, i.e. gay marriage. The majority of Americans at that time, their opinion may have changed, but at that time did not want the state-sponsored sanctioning of marriage, homosexual marriages. God help.
Right. Yeah. So I'm a primitive African. I mean, Africans, look, we're tolerant, but I don't think most people actually really like the idea. So because it's using the word marriage, but it's not a Christian marriage. It is a secular marriage. It is a gay marriage. It is not a Christian marriage. And it's just to rub it in people's faces. I mean, it's one of these ways they want to demoralize you. That's my thought. But moving on, he says, final passage. There is a saying that is attributed to various famous men, including Bismarck and Charles de Gaulle. I think it fits best with Charles de Gaulle. De Gaulle is supposed to have said, and I quote, God takes care of little children, drunkards, and the United States of America. Cute. I mean, there's lots more. There's some great content. I have posted the link to this article, at least the speech, as well as the audio. You can listen to it privately. I think you'll do fine, but it's not great audio recording, and I couldn't find a good one. But it's in the chat if you want to follow this, but it's a really good speech. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about Associate Justice Samuel Chase. He was an Associate Justice for the U.S. Supreme Court, whose acquittal in a politically motivated impeachment trial in 1805, inspired by President Thomas Jefferson, bolstered judicial independence. So this guy was in the Maryland Assembly, Continental Congress. He signed the Declaration of Independence, became a judge of the Baltimore Criminal Court and Chief Judge of the Maryland Court before being appointed to the Supreme Court by George Washington in 1796. Quite an impressive CV. He said, by our form of government, the Christian religion is the established religion. Somehow he has not heard of the Establishment Clause. You see, because the Establishment Clause says you can't favor one denomination of Christianity. You can't favor the Anglican Church, which was the big elephant in the room and the problem back then. You cannot have Catholicism you cannot have the Baptists or any other bunch of weirdo, whatever, one over the other. People have to be free to choose from Christianity, and they all compete in the free marketplace of religion, effectively. Would that be a correct interpretation? It wasn't. Yeah. It was about non-domination of one group, correct?
Right, and that was the establishment. We do not want to have to become Anglican. This is why they put it in the Constitution, even though, granted, there were, I think, 2 states that did have an official religion after the Constitution was passed. But the fact that it's in the Bill of Rights that the federal government will not sanction any one religion over the other. But that does not mean that it's going to establish, like Islam over Christianity or Judaism over Islam or something like that. It's Christianity. There's several denominations that we have within Christianity. You didn't want Catholics, that train wreck that they had in Europe there for centuries, having the Catholics have complete control and power, and then again having the Anglican Church having complete control power over its citizens and using the force of government to enforce their religious precepts.
Yeah, the Anglican Church was a major issue in the U.S. I mean, there's one example I have in the notes where the Anglican Church was really acting like a bit of a tyrant. So, also Joseph Forjud says, Isaiah 33:22, for the Lord is our judge, which is the judiciary, and our lawgiver, the legislature, and our king, the presidency. Yes, that's exactly what I was referring to earlier in terms of a principle which creates the divisions within the U.S. government. But that's a longer story for a different day. So he says, by our form of thanks for that, though. By our form of government, the Christian religion is the established religion, and all sects and denominations of Christians are placed on the same equal footing and are equally entitled to protection in their religious liberty. So they're all entitled to equal, they have free expression. I don't think this means that, look, not all ideas are equal. 1 + 1 is equal to 2, I think, is superior to 1 + 1 is equal to 5.5. But people have a right to say what they want to say and compete.
I was looking at a comment here in the chat, Justin Wooten.
Yeah.
And he's going church shopping, North American Anglican Church, right, over gay marriage. And that has been the gay marriage controversy has been a reason for many church splits and people leaving denominations. For example, in my tradition, the Lutheran tradition, the Luciferian tradition, as far as you're concerned, was
yes.
There was a big split with the Missouri Synod and the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, where the ELCA starts sanctioning gay marriages. And if you look, when they started doing that to now, their membership has just tanked. And this is what you see in several of these woke type churches, when they start sanctioning these things, moving away from the traditional values that the Christian church has professed. They lose more and more members every single year.
Yep. So, right, religion, he goes on, Justice Samuel Chase says, religion is of general and public concern, and on its support depend in great measure the peace and good order of government, safety and happiness of the people. And he's explicitly saying the Christian religion, and he says if you are good Christians, you have good government and a good state. So, yeah, of course, as we all know, Islam is a religion of peace, and if you want a peaceful government, just move to the Middle East and go and move to Syria. Heck, try Turkey, or where they're bombing the Kurds and no one cares. And
Yemen, I hear land is really cheap in Yemen.
Right this time of year too. Yeah. 700,000 dead, no one marching, no one cares, because no Jews, no news.
Those people are starving to. It's just so sad, sick. It really is. It's evil, is what it is.
Yeah. Now he also states, agreed. He also says, I cannot subscribe to the omnipotence of a state legislature. Now, the very same terms are expressed by other founding fathers as well, that when you concentrate power in the hands of one person, you get despotism, you get tyranny, you get oppression. And that is something that is specifically why the government is structured, the U.S. government is structured the way it is, to prevent power concentrating in the hands of one person. Samuel Adams, how much time can you go on it today, Eric? Because I know you've got some other tasks.
I don't have to leave here. I can stay as long as, I can't stay until, I don't know. I can go another hour if you need to. I can stay.
I mean, I typically don't go like an hour, but we can go a little bit.
Take your time. Samuel Adams is like my favorite revolutionary guy. So as soon as I seen him pop up, my adrenaline.
He's the only father that is associated with beer. So I think we'll raise a toast to that. I've had Sam Adams. It was good. I liked it. I may have had two. But yeah. So when you think of Sam Adams, they wouldn't have made a beer after him if he wasn't exceptional.
Yeah. This guy is, he's classic. Some of the things he did is just, anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So, very prominent revolutionary leader. You all make me want to crack a cold one. Me too. Me too. Yeah. Raise a toast. Tom Bunnytail says, hey, Lloyd, Bismarck was also a National Socialist and committed treason on the Prussian people. The term Deutsch came with Adolf Hitler. As you know, I live in Germany, and there's so much to unpack. There is. The Prussians were originally pagan, and they invaded Poland, and they hated the Polish people because the Polish people were Catholic from the 900s. So there was, so there's a lot of, that's one of the reasons that the Prussians, the Germans, hated the, wow, thank you, Sean Anderson. Very kind. Sean Anderson says, one issue addressed in the Declaration of Independence was the British settlement. The French settlers in newly conquered Canada established both Anglicanism and Catholicism. I don't know a great deal about that. But let me just read it again. Addressed in the Declaration was the British settlements with the French settlers in New. Okay. Which I guess is fair. Recognizing certain religions is fair. I don't think there's necessarily a problem with that. But thanks. Again, ideas that I may add to that. And thank you very much again for the very generous super chat. Your comment on that, Eric? You may know more about this than I do. It's a bit.
Well, the English basically took away all of the French holdings after the French and Indian War. 1860 or 1763, I think, was the Treaty of Paris. Of course, everything's the Treaty of Paris. And when they did that, you still had French settlers, French influence in what they call the Northwest region, which was, of course, if anything, that'd be like the Great Lakes region today. So when we start talking about, you had English settlements there, which allowed Catholics, which were French. I mean, that's with heavily French. Well, France, when it colonized, was Catholic. So this is what you would expect. Of course, you would have French influence, and of course, you would have Anglican influence if you have England. As a matter of fact, Canada, all of Canada, was England. I can't remember when Canada became its own nation, but we signed. I can't remember. I don't know how many treaties with Canada, establishing a border, a peaceful border, I might add, with England, all the way up until it was the I can't remember what James K. Polk. James K. Polk, when they struck a deal for the Northwest Territories, all that land sharing out there, the Oregon Territory is what it was called. So yeah, here you have, again, I'm getting off topic again. I apologize for that, but you have Catholicism heavily established in those regions controlled by the French, taken by the English during the French and Indian War. So therefore, you would have a tolerance of Catholicism and the Anglican Church there. You're making me thirsty.
Yeah, no, someone just mentioned George Washington brewed red ale, but they're associated with Budweiser, who are associated with a certain, and I'm going to use this word very carefully, Tranny. You know, so yeah, isn't that, that just brings a bad thought to mind. But thank you.
That was Bud Light, though.
Was it Bud Light?
It was well. Bud Light. Sure, we don't, because I do like Budweiser, but that was Bud Light.
All right, let's continue with Samuel Adams. The Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. In other words, you cannot chop off people's arms. They have a right to their own arms. And it says people, it said, look, the people want the right to bear arms. What do? You rip off their sleeves. That's how you have bare arms. That's how you have bare arms. Am I correct, Eric?
You would be surprised. I'm going to pull it up here, what the founding fathers had to say about the Second Amendment. But this, again, Samuel Adams, brother of John Adams, this guy was the leader of he was the leader of what they called the Sons of Liberty. He was the guy that organized all of these rebellions against.
I mean, he liked beer and guns. What's not to like about the guy?
This guy is fast becoming my favorite revolutionary. I thought, I was a Paul Revere guy, but my goodness, this guy.
Which makes me think, where do people get the anti-Second Amendment claims that you find in New York and California? Where are they getting this? The early fathers clearly contradict all of this.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to pull that up, what they had to say about that. I have it on a separate hard drive, all of my...
Right. Okay, well, while you find that, it says, the right to freedom is the gift of God Almighty. The rights of the colonists as Christians may be best understood by reading and carefully studying the institutes of the great lawgiver and head of the Christian church, which are to be found clearly written and promulgated in the New Testament. Very Christian, loves his guns, great beer. So, yeah, and hopefully you can see there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that indicates, without ambiguity, clearly and distinctly, America is founded as a Christian nation by Christians. Anyone trying to insist that no, these are Satanists, these are secularists, these are deists, and they have the modern meaning of deist, not the old meaning of deist, or whatever is they're supposed to be, this person is selling you propaganda. This person is themselves propagandized. Don't believe it. The facts go against them. The right of freedom being the gift of God Almighty, it is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave. So freedom is the gift of God. It is not a privilege granted to you by the government that thinks that, okay, well, maybe I'll let you do something now. Neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupt. That's why they always spoke of that you had to operate with, what's the term, virtue. He therefore is the truest friend to liberty of his country, who tries the most to promote its virtue. And remember, virtue was associated with the requirement for having a republic, Christian virtue. And the sum of all is, if we would most truly enjoy this gift of heaven, let us become a virtuous people. And the final one, and you can go on, Eric. We have this day restored the sovereign, to whom alone men ought to be obedient. He reigns in heaven, and from the rising to the setting sun, may his kingdom come. Liberty will not long survive the total extinction of, and I'll add a bracket here, Christian morals.
Right. Yeah. Again, Sam Adams is a great revolutionary, and those revolutionaries at that time were rebelling against an over-oppressive Anglican church led by a king, trying to impose their religious precepts upon the American people. I'm still trying to get this to come up here. Let me see here. Is this it?
Artsy Fartsy Nerdy Wordy says, freedom isn't a right unless you follow God, which is true. You're either a slave to vice or to virtue. And the only way to get true freedom is to be a slave to virtue, to God. I'd say that's well said. Real philosopher there. So let me know when you get your notes up, and I'll do a few more slides.
Right.
And let's talk about Elias Boudinot, lawyer, statesman from Elizabeth, New Jersey, delegate to the Continental Congress and served as president of Congress, U.S. senator, and he played a significant role in shaping early American legislation and policies. And what does he tell us? It is no new thing for the enemies of truth and godliness to descend to the meanest arts in order to accomplish the horrid purpose of ruining souls of men. So he believes people have souls, and he believes that enemies of truth and godliness, there is no other instance than that of the Code of Moses, the Mosaic Law, of a body of laws being produced at once and remaining without addition afterwards. So the Ten Commandments. He's basically saying only the Ten Commandments effectively have stood as a moral set of moral precepts, as a body of moral laws being produced at once and remaining unchanged for eternity due to their perfection. That would be the implication here. And the boldness of impiety is often mistaken for knowledge. In other words, the boldness of atheists, or people who do not have religious virtue, founded on an independent spirit, because what do they call it? We are free thinkers. This was something that was already present in that time, thereby saps the necessary defense of a simple innocence and unsuspecting modesty. So here he would be alluding to the French Revolution and the French revolutionary philosophies, which were atheistic, secularist, and most decidedly both Freemasonic and pagan. So now he publicly challenged Thomas Paine's secularism. I mentioned Thomas Paine in relation to the previous episode we spoke of the Treaty of Tripoli, and especially Thomas Paine's Age of Reason, which attacked Christianity. So here you've got once a devout Christian who became a Unitarian, and again, Unitarianism is something that I'll do a series of episodes on, because I think Unitarianism is an evil in Christian disguise. And Thomas Paine then eventually joined the French Revolution, became a French citizen, and went insane. And he then flipped around and started attacking Christianity. So while Paine's earlier work, Common Sense, had biblical arguments, his later writings were irreligious. After receiving a draft of Age of Reason, Benjamin Franklin urged Thomas Paine not to publish it. Benjamin Franklin is supposed to be non-Christian, Satanist, or whatever the heck, insert your label. And he said, look, this work is irreligious, do not publish it. Boudinot, also appalled by Paine's stance, responded in 1801 with his own work, The Age of Revelation, where he expressed his disdain for Paine's ideas and highlighted the Founding Fathers' opposition to secularism and deism. So this is someone who definitely we need to go and look at. What did he write? What did he say? But this man, one of the Founding Fathers, is stating that the Founding Fathers opposed secularism and deism. Your thoughts, Eric?
It's crazy, because one of the main motivations that people, because when today we get a lot of our information from social media, and in the past we got it from television, and before that they got it from movies, And with this Thomas Paine guy, they got it from books. And he had the most popular book, pamphlet, at the time called Common Sense. And this is what rose up the anger towards the English government. And then during the war, he writes this very famous poem called The American Crisis, where he talks about, these are the times that, how does it go? I brought it up. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in the crisis shrink from the service of the country. But he that stands now deserves the love and thanks of man and women. This is the same guy. It's really hard to believe that wrote all these great things, these revolutionary ideas based on Christian precepts, leaves it. And this guy, Boudinot, how do you pronounce his name?
Boudinot, yeah, I would say.
Boudinot comes out and says, look, you've lost your mind, Tommy. You need to fix it. I still can't get these things to come up. I'm sorry. I'm doing my best right now.
No worries. Let me just find it. I wanted to just highlight. There we go. If Benjamin Franklin was irreligious and didn't care for religion, why would he be concerned with someone who's publishing anti-Christian writings? Benjamin Franklin. And there we go. So Benjamin Franklin advised Paine against publishing The Rights of Man and what he called French revolutionary fashionable pseudo-philosophy. So Ben Franklin thought that the atheist works, the philosophical works of these supposed deists, but in truth atheists who just didn't want to admit it, he called them fashionable pseudo-philosophy. So Benjamin Franklin, who was supposed to be one of them, rejected those teachings. Hopefully you can understand that someone's been lying to you for a long time about the Christian nature of the American Revolution, the American Enlightenment, and the Founding Fathers. I'll do a couple more slides. I'll finish with Boudinot. I'll finish on this slide. So final slide. You didn't get your notes up. Get it for next week, Eric, and we can do that again.
I'm trying to. I've given up on my school notes. I have them stored on a separate hard drive that I would present when I went over the Bill of Rights, and I would always cite what the Founding Fathers had to say about that. James Madison. Do you know who James Madison is?
I've mentioned him several times so far in the earlier part.
Right. He's the one that basically laid out the roadmap of the Constitution at the Constitutional Convention. But they call him the father of the Constitution because it was his plan to set up a bicameral legislature, three branches of government. It was his plan that won out during the convention. And James Madison says about the Second Amendment, he says the highest number to which, according to the best computation, a standing army can be carried in any country does not exceed 100 part of the whole of swords or 25th part of the number bear. To these would be oppressed a militia, half dozen officers. That's not it. I'm trying. Let me find. But he had all kinds of comments about the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. As a matter of fact, George Washington had a lot to say about it. I'm just trying to find these comments is a bad word, quotations. Because all of them had, let's see, okay, Thomas Jefferson, no free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. James Madison, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. He also said that a well-regulated militia is the best security of a free country. Our friend, Samuel Adams, should not prevent the peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. John Adams, arms in the hands of citizens can be used for private self-defense. Roger Sherman, another signer of the Declaration of Independence, that the privilege of any citizen to bear arms and resist attacks on the liberty of their property. All of them. All of these founding fathers had something positive to say about the Second Amendment.
Right.
Sorry.
So yeah, make some notes, and we can always discuss again in a different episode. So, guys, final slide. I'll finish with Elias Boudinot. Hopefully, you can see that there is no truth to the claims that there's a lack of Christianity in the founding of America. Lots of people are misled, lots of people are deceived, and lots of people are just passing on these deceptions to you. Don't buy it. Okay, so, and again, if you like these slides, if you like what I'm doing, for $5, you can buy the slides in my little coffee shop. There's a link in the pinned comment. So if you like them, please do support the channel. It would be much appreciated. For members, it's available. Check the comments. Check the community page. It's all available free for you there. I have the first 99 slides available. Okay, so Elias Boudinot's Christian faith was expressed through support for the formation of the American Bible Society, which is what you do when you're an atheist. Despite his poor health, he envisioned the General Bible Society to distribute the Bible widely. In a letter to William Jay, famed for his the Federalist Papers, son of Chief Justice John Jay, he laid the groundwork for this initiative. Following this, a meeting was held in New York City to establish the society. In 1816, he was elected its first president of the American Bible Society, and he held the role until he died 5 years later. John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, was a founding member of the American Bible Society, serving as its first vice president. After Elias Boudinot's death, Jay was elected president. Other notable presidents include Frederick Theodore Frelinghuysen, a lawyer, senator, and Secretary of State; Daniel Coit Gilman, president of Johns Hopkins University; Edward Francis Hyde, former president of the Philharmonic Society; and Francis Scott Key, the author of the U.S. National Anthem. So, and he writes here, by the religion which he professed, he was supported and cheered as he went down to the grave. So written about him, sir. His patience was unexhausted. His faith was strong and triumphant, exhorting those around him to rest in Jesus Christ as the only ground of trust. That's suspiciously, that sounds Freemasonic, maybe Muslim, could be Buddhist. What do you think, Eric?
I would maybe a Hindu. No,
Hindu. I don't know. Like this Jesus Christ
character. Heard by Hindus, I've heard. I don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, why? Yeah, it's just really suspicious. It's too Christian. This person has to be a Freemason that's trying to. I don't know. I don't get it. But they're talking about Jesus a whole lot, and then commending his daughter and only child to the care of his friends. He expressed his desire to depart in peace to the bosom of his Father in heaven, and his last prayer was, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Mm-hmm. So there we can, hopefully you guys have had a great deal of information to prove the simple fact that America was, and must be a Christian nation. Artsy Fartsy says, this has been a wonderful conversation, greatly enjoyed, but I have to get going. Well, we've just finished, so thank you very much. See you next time, and get well soon. Yes, I have discussed separation of church and state, and in fact, we discussed it in this episode as well. And yes, we discussed how it is brought up in exactly the opposite way it was intended, and how a Chief Justice from the Supreme Court, who was literally a lifetime KKK member, was the one who instituted that nonsense in 1948.
Hugo Black, he hated Catholics too. Yeah. That's why he did it, because they were using school buses to transport kids to Catholic schools. That's why this came up with it. Yeah, and this letter about the Baptists, I mentioned a couple of episodes ago that letter is how the whole idea got started. So that is later in my slideshow, that discussion of Thomas Jefferson, how that whole story went awry. Right. So yeah, guys, that is it from me for this evening. I hope you've gained a lot of value out of it. You've learned something, and thank you, Eric. Final word to you, and then we can call it a night. Yeah, sure. I'm going to be going live today at 5:30 Central Time on the Crossing the Crescent discussion group. Today, we're going to be talking about how the Bible has been corrupted over the centuries by them evil scribes and Christians and early church fathers, and basically dispelling this Muslim notion of biblical corruption. Of course, I'm being facetious, but and I'm going to show today, as a matter of fact, today I'm going to show you how the autographs survived even to the beginning of the 4th century, which you might think, hey, what are you talking about? Well, I don't want you to stay up for the show, Lloyd, but you can watch at a later time, and you can see how even the autographs of John's Gospel is thought to have existed in 290 AD, and the epistles of Paul in the early 3rd century. So this idea of the Bible's been corrupted is a bunch of hooey, another lie told by Muslim apologists or polemists.
Right. So guys, if you want the right to bear arms, I suggest you cut off your sleeves. And because as you know, that is what, ask anyone from San Francisco, they'll tell you that's what the founding fathers meant. If you want bare arms, get yourself a little wife beater, tank top, and you're good to go. That's what the founding fathers meant.
I have a question for you, Lloyd. In Poland, do they have something akin to the right to keep and bear arms there?
Man, Polish. I know a few Polish people who walk around with the whole cutlery set on them, an armory basically, just more knives than you can count, longer than your forearm. And I know people who own like 1 billion guns, and yeah, you can own guns. Look, it's not necessarily. I mean, you can get one. It's not like it's free and open like the U.S., but you can certainly.
Okay. Well, I know the further east you go, the more conservative they are as far as allowing you to keep arms. But
if you join like a gun club which does competition and you register and you get your competition license, I think you can own up to about 40 guns.
Wow. All right. Well, I couldn't go there, but
yep. So I mean, I've gone shooting a few times. I've got a friend who's got like a bunch of guns. He's got a whole, but that's a long story. He's got a whole selection, and I mean, so he's got lovely selection of guns. So it's great.
Yeah. Well, here in the United States, we love our second. I was out with my grandson yesterday. We were out shooting clays. I got him a shotgun, and he was
right.
Not a bad little shot, that's for sure. It was kind of fun. It was fun. It was really fun.
Right. So, guys, good night, and God bless. And yeah, stand up for the truth, know the facts, defend your faith, defend your culture, push back against the lies, and yeah, just keep on grinding their gears. Just little grains of sand. Keep grinding their gears until you grind their gears to a halt. That's my word. So guys, good night. Take care. God bless.
Thanks for having me, Lloyd.
Welcome.